Monday, Hank Brennan stated in court that he intended on calling rebuttal witnesses. There was a brief hearing on it where he stated he would call Dr. Welcher to rebut testimony given by the ARCA witnesses presented by the defense. He was also going to call two other witnesses, Davis and Hartnett. Hartnett was supposed to testify about the dog DNA not being present on John O'Keefe's shirt.
So the Commonwealth's motion to call witnesses in rebuttal. I've read everything. Ms. Little, I appreciate you getting your opposition to me. I think I had it by Saturday morning, so I appreciate it. I read all the cases on it. Does the defense want to be heard any further on this?
Yes, briefly.
Okay.
With regard to Dr. Crosby and Ms. Coon, as the first...
Speak into a microphone.
Sorry?
Speak into a microphone.
With regard to Dr. Crosby and Ms. Coon, the Commonwealth has been on notice that the defendant intends to present a defense regarding the arm injuries, that this was caused by a dog bite. They have been on notice of that, not just for months, but for years. That was presented at the first trial. The Commonwealth does not have a right to rebut information that they have been on notice of from the start of the case. So their decision to wait for rebuttal to call these two witnesses is improper, and we're asking the court to exclude their testimony. All right. As it relates to Dr. Welcher, the scope of his testimony, our request is that that be limited to very specific information, specifically responding to the new testing that ARCA has done. As the court knows, the Commonwealth has proposed a number of new testing ideas as well as information that is greatly outside the scope of what ARCA intends to testify to. And so we're asking that the court limit their testimony from engaging in new testing that has nothing to do with what ARCA has testified about at this trial. With regard to Dr. Welcher's testimony, the court has made very, very strong rulings that Dr. Wolf as well as Dr. Rentschler are not allowed to speak to the credibility of Dr. Welcher himself. And so some of the information that the Commonwealth proposes is to directly attack the testimony of Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler. And under the court's rulings, we're asking that the court limit that scope as well.
And I told you I would.
Thank you.
All right.
That's all, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan, do you want to be heard?
Regarding DNA evidence, evidence cannot be rebutted until it is introduced because the defense has a number of potential ideas of areas of testimony. It does not compel the Commonwealth to try to anticipate or deflect attacks, especially if they're meritless. And so the issue of dogs and dog DNA does not become relevant until the defense calls a so-called dog expert. They raise the issue, it's proper grounds for rebuttal. There are three witnesses, Ms. Hartnett, UC Davis, and Dr. Crosby. If Dr. LaPosada is precluded from testifying about dog bites, we would not call Dr. Crosby as a witness. However, regardless of what Dr. LaPosada says, we would ask to call Ms. Hartnett and to call the witness from UC Davis. It is an issue that directly affects the assessment of Dr. Russell, the very expert they chose to call in their case in chief, and so we can now, from my perspective, properly rebut it. The second issue regarding Dr. Welcher, limited to the new information you will see from the testimony or have heard. Most of the testimony is new, but we understand it's limited. We don't expect Dr. Welcher to have a direct comment on the credibility of any witnesses, but he will address the tests, how he believes would be the proper procedure, and there'll be a number of issues that have been raised on direct examination, but he will not in any way have a comment on the credibility of the defense experts.
All right. So the case law supports me allowing this motion. I'm allowing the Commonwealth's motion. So the motion for rebuttal witnesses is allowed. Mr. Brennan has said he will not call Dr. Crosby, depending on the testimony that comes in. So, all right, Jim, I'm just going to give you this.
Well, in a surprising twist, today, Brennan announced he will not be calling any rebuttal witnesses. I'm going to play the important parts of the doctor's testimony today to highlight 3 important things. I want to highlight the important points that the doctor made to prove John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. Then I'm going to highlight Hank's desperation as he cross-examines this doctor. His questions are bizarre, far-reaching, confusing, with a dash of gaslighting. It's painful. I am only going to do the sound bites. Quick, quick, quick. I will not put you through the full cross.
So the purpose of my investigation in this matter was to evaluate the evidence, and particularly as it pertains to the alleged theory of what occurred in this case. Okay. If you haven't performed a proper analysis, then you can't come to a conclusion that something happened. You can't depend just on your experience. You have to have the analysis, the evidence, and the details to come to a conclusion in a case.
How do you best get details to come to a conclusion in a case?
You need research. You need peer-reviewed articles. You need evidence. You perform testing. You have to demonstrate what you think happened is A, possible, and B, actually did occur. And in order to do that, you need hard evidence to demonstrate that that's what actually occurred in this case. Slides are from the PowerPoint presentation that Aperture provided.
All right, so you didn't create these?
I did not, no, sir.
Describe the angle of the arm in the left photograph with the drinking glass in the hand.
Wow, how ridiculous this experiment was. He stood there wearing John's clothing, or clothing replica, and put this arm out holding a glass in front of a freshly painted taillight and has them back up at 2 miles per hour to prove that it's possible at that angle. His arm was the perfect height. Like, I don't even know what they're trying to prove here. It's just so bizarre because I usually see this kind of expert in the defense. It's usually the other way around. It's extremely strange to watch the prosecutor call unqualified experts. It tells me that the qualified experts would not say what they needed them to say. So they had to go pay $300,000-$400,000 for some expert to come in, get on the stand, and be willing to gaslight and lie. Geometry
just means shape. So the way I interpreted this is the one test that was performed with respect to the taillight. This is the only test I saw that Aperture performed involving the taillight and the arm, is that with this paint transfer test, they concluded that, again, the area where the paint was transferred onto the arm is consistent, the same shape and orientation as apparently the lacerations found on Mr. O'Keefe's forearm.
Did this test, in your opinion, establish force multipliers that were exerted on the taillight?
It has nothing to do with force. It doesn't describe the force exerted on the taillight or on the arm. It doesn't describe how the arm would have moved as it hit the taillight. It doesn't describe how the taillight would fracture. It doesn't describe how you would actually get the lacerations on the arm. Again, all this does is generally, and I made an error there. This report, and you can see the slide says laceration. Mr. O'Keefe did not have lacerations on his arm.
What did he have?
He was diagnosed with superficial abrasions.
Is there a difference between a laceration and an abrasion?
There's a distinct difference, both biomechanically and medically, yes.
Is that an important distinction?
That is.
Why?
The first step of the biomechanical analysis is identify the injuries, and you have to take the diagnosed injuries identified by a medical doctor. So it's superficial abrasions. To put lacerations on, that's simply incorrect. That's core to the analysis because you're trying to determine how an injury occurred. You have to know what that injury is. You have to have the correct injury to be able to evaluate it. Does the evidence from the arm match up to the evidence on the sweatshirt? Again, on the left side is from the autopsy report from the medical examiner, and then the right side is actually from the Good Samaritan hospital where Mr. O'Keefe was taken. No, there were no diagnosed or references to fractures on any part of his right arm or hand. That's the X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand taken January 31st, I believe. No, if X-rays exist, you need to review them. You need to determine what they represent and what injuries either did or didn't occur. You absolutely need to look at them.
Do you see any injuries represented or any defects represented in this X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand?
I do not, no, sir. So this is a X-ray. The forearm shows the ulna and the radius, which are the two bones in the forearm.
Do you see any defects, injury, trauma to these bones or anything associated with those bones?
I do not. I did not note any indication or any signs of trauma or injury to the forearm or to the wrist in this case. This is the right humerus, the right upper bone of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Do you notice, or did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you note any defects, trauma, injuries at all with regard to the bone is the
humerus.
The humerus?
I did not, no, sir.
What about the joints associated with the humerus, top or bottom?
I did not note any injuries or damage to either the elbow or the shoulder joint either.
What is your opinion in conclusion, having reviewed all three of these X-rays, with regard to the condition of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, starting from the arm, the forearm, and the bones in the hand?
There's no indication of any type of acute injury from the X-ray to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his hand, his forearm, or his upper arm.
Thank you. We can switch that back.
So again, this is the hoodie or sweatshirt that Mr. O'Keefe had on at the time of this alleged incident. There were 9 different punctures or holes noted in the sleeve of the sweatshirt. Those are indicators I added based on the length of the ruler to show the approximate size, length, and width of those abrasions.
Was it important in your biomechanical analysis to measure and denote all the injuries?
It was, yes.
Did you actually count the number of injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
I did, yes.
How many injuries did he have? How many distinct and separate injuries did Mr. O'Keefe's arm present?
Conservatively, I counted 36 different superficial abrasions on his right arm.
And did you go through all the photographs in an effort to count and distinguish one abrasion and one defect on his skin from another?
I did, yes, sir.
And you said conservatively 36 separate abrasions, correct?
That's correct.
What does that mean in terms of the mechanism that you would expect to cause that abrasion?
Well, you need 36 different points of contact to get through the sweatshirt and get to the skin to actually cause abrasion to the skin. 36 different separate points of contact to the skin.
How many defects, remind us, how many defects were noted by the crime lab in Mr. O'Keefe's right sleeve?
9 defects.
Did you note anywhere in the Aperture report a denotation of the number of abrasions, counting the number of abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
There's no denotation, no indication that the number of abrasions were ever counted. No, sir.
As to whether or not the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm are consistent with striking the right rear taillight of the Lexus?
I did, yes.
And what is that conclusion?
That they're inconsistent with striking the taillight or being produced as a result of contact with the taillight.
Why did you come to that conclusion?
There's a number of reasons that I came to. First of all, the abrasions, the numbers don't correspond to the number of holes or...
Sustained.
Well, that you have to, if those abrasions came from contact with the taillight, you have to be able to correlate them and line them up with 36 different contacts from the taillight. Because you can't say that the area where the blue paint is corresponds to the area of the abrasions if you don't take measurements. If you just eyeball it, all you can say is by eyeballing it, it looks approximately the same. But that's not scientific. You can't come to an actual conclusion that where that paint covers the arm is where those abrasions actually were. They could lie outside, they could lie forward, they could lie above that painted area. You can't say with any scientific certainty that that area of paint corresponds to where the... So in this slide, the picture on the far left is the photographs provided from the autopsy in hospital with Mr. O'Keefe's right arm fully extended. Again, those are the only photographs we have.
What about the photograph in the middle and to the far right?
In the middle and the far right, what I did was actually take that arm and then rotate the forearm to put it in a position that it would be in, as demonstrated by the paint test, with the arm at approximately 90 degrees.
What was the import of this this undertaking?
Well, if you look at the paint test and the way the arm's at 90 degrees and having the car come and essentially contact and push the arm out of the way, that's going to give you or tell you the directionality or the direction of the abrasions. Because if you have your arm at a right angle and the vehicle comes and pushes and slides against it on that forearm, you would expect those abrasions to be horizontal, to be in line with that forearm.
Are they?
They're not. You can see some of them are vertical, some of them are angled, some of them it's hard to tell what the directionality is. But if your arm, again, is being struck and pushed this way, as it's pushed and as the car goes by, if this would occur in this manner, you would expect those abrasions to be horizontal in the direction that the vehicle's at. This shows, you can see on the right, I added arrows to kind of show the directionality of the different abrasions. And on the forearm, they simply do not line up with the type of kinematics or the type of motion shown in the paint test. Again, of the arm getting pushed out of the way and the car traveling past. If there were going to be abrasions from the fractured glass as it moves along, again, it would be lengthwise parallel to the forearm. You can't get, for instance, horizontal abrasions on the upper arm and somehow get vertical and angled abrasions on the forearm. The kinematics don't work out to actually produce those. Right as the car contacts the arm, the surrogate pushes his elbow forward, leans into the car against the light, and then rolls off.
Can you play that for us, please?
The paint transfer test, all it can show is the approximate area, of where the arm was covered in paint. As the surrogate jammed his elbow in and rolled against the taillight cover. So it tells us nothing about what may have actually occurred, how the lacerations were actually, or the abrasions were produced. It doesn't talk about the kinematics of the arm to actually cause those abrasions. All it does is just say, under this specific condition, if someone was to stand there and then shoot your elbow forward and lean in, you would get paint on this approximate part of the arm, because we don't even have any measurements for it. That's the only thing that test demonstrates, and that's the only test that was conducted to look at the interaction between the arm and the Lexus in this case.
Infuriates me about that lame, non-scientific paint test that the Commonwealth put forth is that they knew it was a scam. They were just trying to fool the jury because what? The jury's made up of a bunch of lay people who aren't, experts in the field. But to see that they were literally controlling that experiment, he pushed his body into the car as it slowly approached him to prove what? That if there's paint on the taillight, it can get on your arm if you lean up against a car. I mean, if Karen Reed did not raise enough money to have this amazing legal team, she would have been found guilty, and all of this is a scam. None of this is logical or even real. And the sad part is, we will never know what really happened to John O'Keefe that day.
Did you reach any opinions and conclusions regarding whether the physical evidence is consistent or inconsistent with the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm?
I did, yes.
And what are what's the basis?
The basis is looking at the number of laceration or the number of abrasions on the arm, as well as the orientation and direction of those abrasions. and they don't correspond to how the arm would interact with the vehicle if it was at a right angle and struck by the rear of that vehicle.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, Doctor?
I do, yes, sir. So this was testing done at 15 miles an hour. So this is with the hybrid arm and suspended so that it was actually impacting the right rear of the Lexus as the Lexus was traveling at 15 miles an hour. There was on both the arm as well as the hand, yes.
What was the result of the damage to the taillight based on this test?
So in this test, there was actually no damage. As you can see, it catches kind of the hand and the forearm. And if you want to describe it as kind of a glancing blow, there was not enough force at 15 miles an hour on this glancing blow to actually fracture the taillight.
Is the position of this arm relative to the SUV consistent or inconsistent with the original spot that the surrogate in the paint test was standing as it related to the SUV?
It's consistent. We lined it up so it's consistent with that original location so that it would not impact the elbow or the upper arm. So at that position, if there's impact to the arm at 15 miles an hour, it doesn't cause the taillight to fracture. And it's also important to look at the kinematics. If you look at the acceleration data below, that hand and arm is accelerated. The hand's accelerated up to the speed of the vehicle in about 2 to 4 milliseconds.
How long does it take to blink your eye?
250 milliseconds. It takes a quarter of a second to blink your eye. So this occurs if your hand's hit at 15 miles an hour by a car, it's going to be accelerated up to the speed of the car about 50 times faster than you can blink.
And what are we looking at in this?
So this is lab testing at 17 miles an hour. So the housing and the cover was basically propelled into the forearm of the dummy at 17 miles an hour.
What was the acceleration that was noted on the arm?
So when you look at the arm, its acceleration here is almost 300 Gs.
What does that mean to us?
So 300 Gs. If you look at weight, if you say the weight of the arm is 10 pounds, 300 Gs means there's 3,000 pounds of force acting on that arm.
Is that enough to break a bone?
It's more than enough to break a bone.
Is that enough to tear ligaments?
Absolutely, yes.
What about the bones in the hand? Are those stronger or the same resistance as the bones in the forearm? Or are they more delicate?
No, the bones in the hand are, as you can imagine, much weaker because they're much smaller. When you look at the carpal bones, the metacarpal interphalangeal joint, which is basically your knuckles, they are much smaller and it takes much less force to fracture your hand bones compared to your ulna or your radius.
Let's go to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this is a 24-mile-an-hour impact with the arm of the dummy contacting the rear, again, tail light. And it shows you the motion, the dummy suspended, shows you the motion of the dummy and, again, the force and acceleration. Now, that right video I put in because that's real-time video. We've been showing the low speed, but look on the right. This is the actual speed at 24 miles an hour. That's what it looks like if you have your hand out and it's struck by an SUV.
Is the arm accelerated do the same physics apply? Is the arm accelerated up to the speed of the car in milliseconds?
It is, yes. It's all about weight, right? Because you have a 6,000-pound car and you have a 10-pound arm. It's whatever speed that car is going, your arm, your hand, whatever's sticking out there is immediately going to get accelerated up to the speed of that vehicle.
The video on the right is in real time. Like you said, it's sped up in milliseconds. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is the Hybrid 3 that's used in this test, is that suspended from above?
The dummy in this test is suspended from above, yes, like a pendulum, barely touching the ground.
Is the dummy connected to the ground in any way?
No, it's just its feet are barely touching.
What would happen if there were forces applied to that dummy that went perpendicular to the travel of the vehicle? What would happen to the dummy?
The dummy would swing out like a pendulum in that direction.
Based on your review of the test that was done, the 24-mile-an-hour test, were there forces on that dummy that were perpendicular to the car to such that the dummy would swing out or be forced out or be propelled out away from the car?
No, there were no forces from the testing, and it's simple physics. Your center of mass of your body is basically your umbilicus or your belly button. So in order to move the body, you have to apply a force at that part of the body. If your arm's struck, it's not going to move your body appreciably. All it's going to do, your arm's like a moment arm, it's going to spin you around. Could there be some motion forward or backward if you take a step? Possibly. But the center of mass of your body isn't going to move. You have to get struck by the vehicle to have the body actually move in a specific direction.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What is this showing?
So this is a slow-mo of the overhead from the real time. It was a GoPro that was recording that real-time video, and this is a slow motion of that video.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. As you see the vehicle contact the arm, what happens to the arm as it's being contacted in those milliseconds where it's being accelerated up to 24 miles an hour?
Well, the arm's accelerated up and pushed away from the body. So whatever part of your arm or body is contacting the car, that's going to be pushed forward away from the rest of your body. So not only is it loading the arm with an impact force as it strikes the arm and the hand, but then it's actually stressing the joints too. It's like ripping imagine having a car come and 3,000 pounds of force pulling your arm forward at the elbow, at the shoulder joint. It's putting a lot of force and pressure on that appendage.
What's the G-force for the 24-mile-an-hour impact?
So at 24 miles an hour for the arm, the acceleration is 302 Gs. And for the hand, it's about 435 Gs.
Does that translate to over 4,000 pounds of pressure?
Well, for the arm, it's close to 3,000 if you say a 10-pound weight, and for the hand, that can be anywhere from 800 to about 1,600 pounds of force acting just on the hand itself.
Understood.
If Mr. O'Keefe's holding a glass at the time of this impact, think about that. What happens is you're holding a glass. It exposes the knuckles. So if you're holding a glass and your arm's at a 90-degree angle and the car comes back and hits your hand, it's going to strike right on the knuckles. The force is going to be applied right at that joint. And then it's going to likely hit along the forearm back near the elbow. There was no evidence or indication or diagnosis of any dislocations or fractures to the arm at all.
Fractures or broken bones at all?
Correct, nothing. Now, you have to remember, as that arm, if it contacts and fractures the taillight, it's not exposed to the fractured pieces that still exist on the taillight itself, because those pieces that fracture haven't gone anywhere because they're against the arm itself. And then as the arm moves away, the pieces then move with the vehicle. It is not, I don't believe it's physically possible. That was not demonstrated in our testing, and I've never seen that demonstrated in any peer-reviewed articles. Now, you can see here again also the light and the fragments are being propelled forward. So you also have to consider where Mr. O'Keefe was found. He was found in the yard about 10 or 20 feet from the road. There was no exact measurements. But if you look at the motion of the taillight, it's going forward. Now, if Mr. O'Keefe has to move diagonally to the top left of that corner, and if he's not hit with the center of mass, he can't get to where he ends up before the taillight fragments have already gone forward and been deposited on the ground. Average running speed is like 4 to 6 miles an hour. Even if this SUV is going 10 miles an hour, the lights fracture, they're dispersed on the ground, and then Mr. O'Keefe somehow ends up to his point of rest. But you wouldn't find the fragments on him because they've already been pushed forward, come to rest, before he even has a chance to get to where There is no defect in that right sleeve of the dummy. No,
Was the dummy's sleeve examined following this test? Closely examined up close rather than just a photograph?
it was examined and photographed, yes, sir.
Was there any defect in that right sleeve at all?
No defects at all were noted in that. This shows some of the photographs taken of the sleeve and the arm to show that there's no defects whatsoever. And it shows the damage to the Lexus. And again, at 24 miles an hour, not only do you get damage to the taillight on the fender there, but you also get damage to the taillight on the liftgate.
Was there any damage on the taillight of the liftgate in the subject SUV?
There was not, no. If Mr. O'Keefe's arm was hit at 24, 29 miles an hour, what this suggests, and there were only abrasions, what this would suggest is that if the taillight doesn't cover or fracture, you can have your arm hit at 24 miles an hour and you wouldn't have any injuries at all, which from a biomechanical standpoint doesn't make sense. If the claim is that the fractured taillight's the only thing.
So I'm sustaining the objection to that. I'm going to strike that portion
Of that Lexus. So if you had a center of mass hit, you would have damage to the liftgate, to the fender, to the sheet metal. You would have substantially more damage than what we had in this case. And secondly, which I believe is just as important, it shows the post-impact trajectory of the dummy. So again, if you're struck on the corner by the Lexus, the dummy goes straight back in line with the vehicle. There's no force and no direction to actually cause that dummy to move off into the side of the vehicle. So you can't be hit center of mass with the vehicle going straight back and somehow end up 10 or 20 feet to the side of where the vehicle is. I did, yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion that it is not consistent with contacting and fracturing the taillight cover.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do, yes, sir.
Can we move to the next slide?
Looking at the kinematics of the arm, it's inconsistent with the evidence we have, with the actual abrasions to the arm, the evidence on the sweatshirt, and that at these speeds, you would likely expect fractures, certainly to the hand, and likely to the ulna and the radius and the forearm, if your hand or arm was struck by the rear of the SUV. But what these tests show is that the force produced on the hand, as represented by the PowerPoint from Aperture, even at 15 miles an hour and likely below that, you would expect to get fracture of the hand bones, of the knuckles, metacarpal interphalangeal joints, and the metacarpal bones if you contacted the rear of that vehicle at that speed.
Did you see any indication in the x-rays you saw or the medical records that you reviewed that Mr. O'Keefe's hand was damaged in such a way that you would expect?
There were no indications whatsoever of that, no, sir.
Next slide.
So even at 10 miles an hour, you're going to have 600 to 1,200 pounds of force acting on the arm.
Is that enough to break it?
That's enough. If you strike the elbow, that's more than enough to actually fracture the different bones of the elbow.
If an arm was hit at that speed with those forces, would you expect the x-rays to show no trauma, no broken bones, no fractures, no hairline fractures?
I would not expect that, no, sir.
Next slide, please.
There was no trauma. There were no fractures. There wasn't even an indication on the arm of where it would have contacted the vehicle. So if there's fracture at the taillight, there's going to be a force at that point on the arm where it actually contacts the taillight and causes that, right? There's going to be a force riser to cause that damage. There was no bruising. There was no lacerations. There was nothing at the alleged point of contact which would indicate an impact that produces thousands of pounds of force on the arm. No evidence of it whatsoever. You have to evaluate that if you want to link all these events. If you want to link the head injury to contact with the car, you have to know what happened in between. You have to know the details. And so the next part was to evaluate that.
Is there any indication in any of the testing that you did or any of the review of the medical records medical records of John O'Keefe, including the autopsy records, all of the autopsy records, the x-rays, and the hospital records, any indication that John O'Keefe was struck center of mass?
None whatsoever. No indication at all that he was struck center of mass.
Do you have an opinion or conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about whether he was struck center of mass.
I do.
And what is that opinion?
I don't believe that he was. The evidence indicates that he was not. If he was struck center of mass, imagine that. You're getting hit at the pelvis. You're getting hit on the thigh. You're getting hit at the knee. Forward, your arm would get pushed into your body, into your ribs, into your torso. You would have very significant and substantial loading to your body, initially the right side of your body, as that impact occurred. And there's no evidence whatsoever that occurred. Would not be possible. Our testing demonstrates that. The peer-reviewed articles demonstrate that. I've seen no evidence anywhere in this case that would suggest or even indicate that if you get a glancing blow or a sideswipe blow, that somehow would produce enough force to push you 8 to 10 feet into the yard. I don't believe it's possible. I've seen no research that would indicate that would occur.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do, yes, sir.
Can we move to the next slide, please?
Because with automobile pedestrian impacts, the lower extremity, your legs, your ankles, your knees, that's the most injured part of the body during autoped impacts. So if he's going to be impacted at that speed, especially center of mass, there's likely going to be injuries to his leg, to his knee. The bumper lines up with the knee. That's one of the most commonly injured parts, as the bumper pushes into the knee, fractures the tibia, the fibula, or damages the knee joint.
Did John O'Keefe suffer any injuries to his lower extremities suggestive of a vehicle impact?
No, I believe the only injury was a 0.5 centimeter abrasion on the outside of the right knee.
Could Mr. O'Keefe have suffered a 0.5 centimeter abrasion on the outside of his right knee by being struck by an SUV at 24 miles an hour?
I don't believe so. I don't see how those kinematics would work.
Sustained.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not that injury was from being struck by an SUV at 24 miles an hour or somewhere around 24 miles an hour?
I do.
What is that opinion?
I do not believe that injury is consistent with being struck by an SUV at approximately 24 miles an hour.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do, yes. On the page there, the last 3 columns are the injuries associated with the SUV strikes. There's fractures to the pelvis, left knee injury to the ACL, the MCL, fracture of the tibia and fibula. There's extensive damage to the legs of all 3 of the cadaver subjects that were struck at 24 miles an hour with an SUV.
Did Mr. O'Keefe show any signs of any of these injuries?
He did not, no.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, what are we looking at in this is slide 7? Yes. What are we looking at in slide 70, Dr. Rinchler?
So this was the one article that was referenced in the ARCCA report with respect to automobile pedestrian impacts. And there was a chart from there that was referenced in the PowerPoint that indicates the head's the most commonly injured body region in pedestrian impacts.
And what significance did that reference have in your analysis?
Well, that's not accurate. This article was written in 1979. And the first modern SUV, the Jeep Cherokee, wasn't manufactured until 1984. So this is an article that's 46 years old that doesn't actually relate to this type of an impact. And that's the only peer-reviewed reference with respect to automobile pedestrian impacts that was cited in the entire ARCCA report.
Can we move to slide 71? What did you see? Describe what you saw in this video.
So this is a passive rearward fall of the ATD dummy. So just releasing and let it fall. Obviously, it's a dummy. There's no musculature. There's no response to that dummy. So this is what would happen if a rigid individual just fell backwards onto a concrete surface.
Can we see it one more time, please? I want to ask you one other question. I'm going to ask you to take note, Doctor, of the impact location. Did you see that?
I did, yes.
What kind of surface is that floor, if you can tell?
That, I believe it indicates it's a concrete surface, concrete floor.
Did you notice if the falling backward like that, the dummy slid across the floor or was propelled across the floor, anything like that?
It did not. It just dropped and angled backwards and hit directly on the floor.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the testing that you reviewed from Aperture is consistent or inconsistent with John O'Keefe being struck by the vehicle, propelled perpendicular, backward, say 7 to 10 feet, and falling straight back onto a hard surface as depicted in the drop test?
The testing's inconsistent with those types of kinematics or that type of scenario.
On what do you base that opinion, sir?
That's based on the testing that was performed, the evidence available in this case, and the kinematics of how somebody would move post-impact after being struck by an SUV.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do, yes.
Can we go to...
Let's apply some common sense from a non-scientific perspective. If he did, in fact, fall flat on his back and smash his head on the hard pavement, which has been clarified as being immediately incapacitating from all expert witnesses, how did he get over to the flagpole? I mean, that's a huge gap in the prosecutor's theory. They're not explaining how he got from smashing his head on hard pavement to getting over to the flagpole and bringing all the shards of taillight with him. It just makes zero sense.
Or did you reach a conclusion whether the biomechanical evidence in this matter is consistent or inconsistent with Mr. O'Keefe's right arm being impacted by the subject 2021 Lexus 570, resulting in a backward fall leading to the head injuries that he suffered?
I did, yes.
And what is that opinion?
My opinion is that the evidence is inconsistent with Mr. O'Keefe being struck on the right arm by the SUV and then moving laterally into the yard and falling backward onto.
And do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do, yes, sir.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Rentschler, facts matter, don't they?
They do, yes, sir.
You've said it many, many times. Facts matter. Isn't that correct?
I think it was details, but facts matter too.
Discussing where Mr. O'Keefe was lying on the side of the yard, weren't you?
Where he came to rest?
Came to rest.
Well, approximately, we don't know the exact position, but yes.
You have no idea where the point of impact was in this collision, do you?
Nobody does.
Collision, do you?
That's correct. There's no evidence.
You also looked at X-rays, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And when you looked at them, did you try to get the impression that you read them, even though you're not a doctor and you can interpret them?
Sustained.
Were you trying to interpret them for us?
No, it was actually interpreted by the medical examiner that there were no acute injuries.
Did you see any MRIs?
I don't believe any MRIs were taken or performed.
In X-rays, does it depict deep soft tissue damage?
Normally, it does not depict soft tissue damage, no.
How about muscle tears?
No, it does not.
How about tendon tears?
Not normally, except you can see laxity in the joints if there is tendon or ligament tears. Normally, you can see laxity in the joints, but it doesn't show the ligament or the tendon itself.
Nerve injuries?
No, sir.
Avulsion fractures?
Yes, sir.
People sometimes get MRIs to see if there's a fracture that doesn't appear in an X-ray. Yes?
Sometimes X-rays are the best for looking at bony fractures. MRI is looking at soft tissue.
This line of questioning about the MRI is another example of burden shifting. He's trying to confuse the jury and make them think that the defense didn't do enough testing and, oh, you should have done an MRI, and, oh, there probably was broken bones, and if they did an MRI that we would see them. We don't see it in the X-ray, but we could see it in an MRI. That is all burden shifting. If anyone that has the burden to do testing, it is the state. It is the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is required to do all testing, not the defense. The defense doesn't have to do anything. And all of his testimony is based on testing that was done by the Commonwealth, period.
Look at the details.
Having experience in pedestrian collisions, you can't think of a similarity between cases as far as vehicles and speeds and totally different injuries occurring.
I'm going to allow that. Can you?
You mean hit the same way with the same type of car at the same speed with the same force?
I'm going to allow it. Can you answer it?
I don't believe I've ever seen a case where two people were hit with the same car at the same speed with the same force with different injuries. I don't even know if you can correlate that.
When you looked at all the tests you did, the plastic broke differently in each and every case, every experiment, didn't it?
Sure, it's broken like that, and I've never seen a case where you get these types of abrasions.
I didn't ask you that. Angles of the break changed from piece to piece, experiment to experiment, didn't they?
I'm sure they did.
Did you watch the videos and watch the damage and take a look and count how many pieces broke in each experiment?
I didn't specifically count, no. We looked at contact to the sleeve and to the dummy itself.
You never counted the broken pieces in each experiment?
I did not. There was no need to.
You can agree that there are significant differences between what you might see on the dummy's arm and what would maybe happen to a human being's arm on the inside.
There can be. That's why you have to look at the acceleration and the force, and that's primarily what the ATD is utilized for.
But did you read out of those 20 pages of references that he offered?
Well, I didn't read any because they weren't referred to in his report for his actual opinions in this case.
Do you know whether or not he considered those references or whether he read those references?
I'm going to allow that.
He didn't cite to any of those references in either the PowerPoint presentation or in his report. That's the knowledge I have of whether he reviewed those.
So you don't know what he considered or thought, do you?
I know what he cited to and he referenced to in his report in PowerPoint. That's the extent.
The
Yes.
question is, you don't know what he was referring or reading or relying on other than what was in his report cited, correct?
Well, right. If he referred to the other articles, yes, certainly other articles in the 60s, 70s, and 80s he may have, but they don't really pertain to what happened in this case.
How many, when you looked at 24, did it ever suggest, this paper, did it ever suggest that it was appropriate to use a crash test dummy in the material of a crash test dummy to make an analysis or determine whether or not there would be documented damage to someone's skin?
No, it didn't. And that's not what I did in this matter.
It never suggests that crash test dummies are appropriate to use when making this type of analysis, does it?
Correct. And that's why I would not do that type of analysis with respect to lacerations. That's not what my analysis involves, sir.
That we also do not believe the current instrumented arm configuration is suitable either for prediction of soft tissue injuries. Would you agree with that?
Well, for laceration, sure, it shouldn't be used for that. It shouldn't be used in that manner. That's why I don't use it in that manner.
Information that Dr. Welcher ever claimed that his test was intended to represent exactly how Mr. O'Keefe's arm was when he was hit. Do you?
Well, the evidence I have for that is that in his report, he says that the orientation and position of the lacerations are consistent with the orientation position of the taillight cover. And then right under that, he has reference to that test that he performed. So again, if he didn't intend to do that, then there's no evidence that he can provide with respect to the arm impact at all. That's the only test that was performed to look at the arm and the taillight cover. If it doesn't represent the actual position, then apparently he has no idea how the arm was positioned or how it was impacted.
He performed, but what I really want to get at is your conclusion, your assumption that Dr. Welcher was suggesting that there was a specific arm angle that occurred in this case that he was identifying. You don't see that anywhere in his report.
Well, it would be pretty odd if the one test he ran didn't actually represent what he thought happened. I don't understand what the value of that would actually be.
Would the answer to my question be no?
You would have to ask Dr. Welcher, I suppose. But if it's not, again, then I'm not sure what that test actually accomplished or represented.
You've made assumptions and then have given opinions to this jury based on your assumptions, haven't you?
I've evaluated the evidence in the one test he ran. If that's incorrect, well, then I would have to correct my opinion and my assumption and say that not only is the test not actually show what occurred, but he hasn't performed anything to actually link the arm contact to the taillight cover. If it doesn't represent that, you're right, I'd change my opinion that there's no evidence, no analysis, no conclusion whatsoever.
I'm going to try to make my question. He never states how far, if at all, Mr. O'Keefe was thrown after being in the collision.
That's right. He does not.
When you don't know the speed, you don't know the body position, and you don't know the angle of the body at the time of collision, you cannot replicate a collision with crash test dummies to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty.
Well, you're right. You can't prove that that actually occurred. That's the basis. Yeah.
And here we are at the Brennan again. I'm actually lapping through, replaying all of this stuff because Brennan keeps trying. He keeps trying to catch him. And this doctor is quick on his feet. He's given the perfect answers. And it all boils down to the Commonwealth has no evidence that there was an actual collision with Karen Reed's car in a human body.
That wouldn't be scientifically reliable to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, would it?
Well, if you perform a test and you state this is what I tested and this is the angle, then you can certainly say these are my conclusions. But if you don't know the throw distance, if you don't know the position, then you're correct. You can't actually come to a conclusion that it didn't occur. If you don't know how something occurred, how can you conclude that it actually occurred? It scientifically makes no sense.
You don't have any evidence, any statement on it that he was trying to reenact the actual collision.
Specifically, Dr. Welcher said in his report on page 9, he said, I have conducted an accident reconstruction and biomechanical engineering analysis of this matter. If he did not recreate how he was positioned, if he did not determine the speed of impact, if he did not determine how Mr. O'Keefe's body moved, if he did not determine where he ended up, then he did not conduct either an accident reconstruction analysis or a biomechanical causation analysis. He did nothing of the sort.
Variables. Have you had cases? You had many cases, you said. Have you had cases where variables are impossible to predict?
It depends. I mean, it depends on what you're looking at. And if you want to conclude that something happened and this is how it occurred, you have to look at those variables. If you can't control for those variables, then it's possible you can't prove that it actually happened. So yes, if you're doing a certain test to prove something, you have to look at how those variables may affect it. But there's basic information you have to know to perform that type of an analysis. I suppose I probably have. I mean, it depends. If you don't know what happened, sure, then you don't know those variables necessarily.
Have you seen crash tests with crash test dummies where there is a light string and somebody cuts the string moments before the impact or a second before the impact?
I have, yes.
That wasn't done in this case, was it?
What? It wasn't necessary.
Was that done in this case?
It wasn't. I'll speak slower and a little clearer.
Then if you answer my question. Is there a reason why you took out a piece of that article that falls between those two paragraphs?
No, I don't think so, no. Those were the most relevant parts.
Did you cut out the part that says some frontal collisions are with the corner of the vehicle where the pedestrian is deflected to one side without secondary impact of the upper body with the vehicle front? Alternatively, the transverse velocity of the pedestrian at impact may be sufficient to prevent head contact as the body rotates sideways off the bonnet. And these situations are known as fender vault. The models presented here do not apply to fender vault. Did you leave that part out purposely?
Oh, yeah, I did, sir, because this isn't a frontal impact with a sedan over the fender of the hood of a sedan. This is with the back of an SUV. So
in this case, you don't know the position of Mr. O'Keefe's arm at impact, do you?
Nobody knows. I don't think his arm was even impacted by the car, so no. I don't know the position of the arm at impact because it wasn't hit by the car.
At the time, the defendant's Lexus was traveling backwards on January 29, 2022, do you?
We have no information that he was even hit by the Lexus. So there wouldn't be any information on the angle if his body wasn't hit.
In your differential diagnosis, you considered all evidence. Did you say that on direct examination?
I don't believe I did. I believe I considered evidence for a biomechanical and accident reconstruction analysis in this case.
So you didn't consider phone data.
Has nothing to do with biomechanics or accident reconstruction.
Did you consider text stream data, Apple Healthcare data?
No, sir.
Did you consider phone temperature, battery temperature data?
Has nothing to do with biomechanics, sir.
I'll ask again, did you consider? So when you're looking at your studies, you consider debris fields.
It depends on the evidence. It depends on how it was collected. It depends if it is accurate or reliable. But from a biomechanical standpoint, no, you don't need to look at the debris field or alleged debris field of a taillight cover. That has nothing to do with the injuries or the position or the movement of an
Exhibit
individual.
73, please. When you were doing your ample study, sir,
Yes.
what I'm asking you is, when you were looking at all the available evidence, did you look at this photo of this alleged taillight chart on the front lawn, 34 Fairview Road? Were you aware of this?
No. Oh, I was aware that there was debris in the yard, but again, that has nothing to do with the biomechanical analysis. If you can't prove that the impact happened, then everything after that doesn't actually matter, does it? Because all of that would be from something else. So unless you prove the core issue at this case, the contact, the post-impact movement, the head injury, without proving that, everything else is ancillary to what you're attempting to conclude.
Piece of a taillight chart?
It looks like it, yes.
Did you consider this in your biomechanical studies that this taillight shard was found in front of 34 Fairview Road?
Was found. Can you give me a precise distance from where the body was found and where that was found with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, with respect to a reference point?
Did you consider this, sir?
There is none. So, no, I did not consider that.
Do you know how this taillight shard got there?
How it got there?
Yes.
That wasn't part of my analysis. There are certainly different possibilities of how that actually occurred.
Exhibit 99. And did you consider how that hat ended up on the ground in front of 34 Fairview?
No, sir, that was not part of my biomechanical analysis. There's a number of ways a hat can end up in a yard.
Right. Is one of those ways being in a collision with a Lexus?
I suppose that's a possibility, or someone could put it there. I mean, there's a number of different possibilities as to when or how a hat may appear in a yard.
Who do you think put it there?
Well, I have no idea. I haven't seen any evidence of how it got there, and frankly, it's immaterial to a biomechanical analysis.
Do you have a theory you want to share with us about planting evidence? Is that where we're getting at, sir? Have you seen this photograph?
I have, yes.
Okay. In your studies or your testing, did you determine how Mr. O'Keefe's shoe ended up near the curb?
No, sir.
In your extensive study of the detail of this case, did you know that these pieces of plastic were removed or scraped from Mr. O'Keefe's clothes, specifically his sweatshirt and his T-shirt? Did you know that?
I was aware that samples were recovered, yes.
Were you aware that these samples were consistent with the broken taillight of Miss Reed's Lexus? Did you know that?
Yes.
Did you do any analysis how these broken taillight shards got into Mr. O'Keefe's clothes?
No, I did not. The first step involved with that would be to actually perform a biomechanical analysis, to look at the movement of the body, how the body was positioned, where it ended up. So without that knowledge, you can't determine exactly how or if those types of shards were deposited there as the result of an actual impact.
You see these pieces of broken plastic, don't you?
I do.
And you understand that these were found in scrapings of Mr. O'Keefe's clothes.
I do.
And you understand that these broken pieces of plastic are consistent with the taillight of Miss Reed's Lexus.
I do, yes.
In your studies and reenactments, did you make any determination how these pieces of broken plastic got into Mr. O'Keefe's clothes?
No, when you look at those studies, first you have to know how the incident occurred. Then you can look at that and determine, if you want to, how that may have occurred, because otherwise there's, again, different ways, different manners in which that may have been deposited on the sweatshirt. Without knowing how this happened, you can't just then look at other evidence and try and predict how it happened. You need the actual evidence to look at the event. This all goes to the event. You need contact with the arm, I guess apparently, to actually cause this incident to occur. And without that evidence of any of that happening, knowing how the body moved, knowing how it was hit, knowing where it ended up, any conclusions drawn off of information like this is just supposition, because you don't know the movement of the body or the vehicle. It's putting the cart before the horse.
Putting the cart before the horse. That's exactly what the Commonwealth did in this case. They came up with a theory that she hit him with the car, and then they tried to make the evidence fit the theory instead of allowing the evidence to form a theory.
Again, if you can't do a proper biomechanical analysis, then that evidence is not consistent. You can't determine how it occurred. You can't say that that's consistent with it. You can't just look at certain evidence and not do a proper analysis. If you can't even tell that an impact occurred, you can't look at tertiary evidence and say, well, this proves that it occurred. In order to say from a biomechanical and accident reconstruction standpoint that an impact occurred and here's how it occurred, you have to understand the mechanics and dynamics before it. This could certainly support that finding and those conclusions, but by itself, I don't know of any methodology in any study or peer-reviewed article that says you can just look at alleged evidence and then form an opinion as to whether an impact occurred.
Not under a microscope. If you pay particular attention to the larger one in the middle, that looks like a shark's tooth. Do you see
Yes.
that one?
Yes.
Do you think, doctor, that some of those appear sharp?
Some of those appear sharp, could possibly cause a laceration, sure, as opposed to an abrasion.
Do you think that any of those could cause an abrasion?
I don't think that you could get a consistent level of superficial abrasions along the entire arm of minimal depth of less than 0.5 millimeter through impact with the glass. To have that minimal force on every part of the arm to only cause superficial abrasions would be highly unlikely.
Do you think some of those sharp pieces, if they were lodged in Mr. O'Keefe's sweater, could cause an abrasion?
It's possible if you had enough punctures and holes in the sweater to correspond with the abrasions on the arm. That would be, I suppose, that could be a possibility. Those are part of the taillight.
Continue a little bit, please. Stop. Did you count how many taillight pieces broke?
We didn't count the taillight pieces. We counted how many punctures or holes there were in the sweatshirt, which was 0.
You do not know how John O'Keefe was standing that night, do you?
If he was standing, if the impact occurred, then no, nobody knows. Like what?
Like, could his feet be twisted and then hit another object like a curb?
Well, there's going to be very little lateral movement of its feet, but even if it did, then it's still going to fall over right where it is.
Could a person stumble backwards after being hit?
I'm going to allow that.
What do you mean by backwards? Because you'd be spinning. So what direction is backwards?
Could a person get their foot caught on a curb, sneaker come off, and then stagger backwards and fall on their head?
Objection, Your Honor.
Doctor?
Can you answer that?
I mean, I guess you could somehow predict or have a possibility of almost anything happening. You could say someone could get hit by a car and do a couple of somersaults into the yard. I mean, there's no evidence of that. So it's just supposition, but I won't say it's impossible.
You think John O'Keefe did somersaults in the front yard of 34th Avenue? Is that what you're telling us, Doctor?
No, I don't think he even got hit by the car, sir.
That's not what I'm asking. I've heard that. I'm asking
Yeah.
if he did somersaults in the front yard.
No, there's no evidence of what he did.
Did you see this photograph, sir?
I did, yes.
And do you see the cut on Mr. O'Keefe's nose, the left side of his nostril?
I do.
In your analysis of whether there was a collision, with the defendant's Lexus, did you consider or know that there was evidence that a piece of glass or a piece of broken plastic was pulled from Mr. O'Keefe's nose?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. I'm going to allow that. So, hold on. Let's get an answer, Dr. Mitchell. Your objection's noted, Mr. Jackson.
I was aware there was some piece of material allegedly pulled from the nose, yes.
Allegedly pulled from the nose?
Yes.
Okay. And that alleged piece of material, were you aware that it was perhaps a piece of glass or broken plastic?
Objection.
I do not know why Bev is allowing that question to stand, because the only evidence that we have that a piece of material was pulled out of his nose was from the person who pulled it out of his nose at the scene. That piece of whatever came out of his nose was never tested. It was never determined to be a piece of glass or a piece of taillight or anything. So I don't know why she is allowing this questioning. It's very bizarre.
Are you aware of that object that was pulled from Mr. O'Keefe's nose? What material that was?
I believe it was glass.
Did you want to know in your assessment about collision where that came from?
Well, I did evaluate that, and it's actually entirely inconsistent with coming from an impact with the vehicle.
You were just asked a couple of questions about they provided information about the prior trial, correct?
Correct.
They is no one associated with the defendant, correct?
That's correct. No one associated with you. And
Mr. Brennan asked you a couple of questions about they being your employer. Do you remember those questions at the beginning of his cross-examination?
I do, yes.
Who is your employer, actually? The actual employer that you work for?
ARCA.
Okay. Wasn't them.
No,
It's a client, correct?
it was a client.
A
That's
completely
correct.
separate entity that hired you for that work, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Do you know when those pieces of plastic got to 34 Fairview?
I do not. No.
Do you know how those pieces of plastic got to 34 Fairview?
I do not, no.
Do you know who put those pieces of plastic at 34 Fairview?
I do not.
Were you aware in your review of the police reports that none of the plastic that you were shown was found at the time John O'Keefe's body was discovered and the area was initially searched?
That is correct, yes. I was aware of that.
You indicated that the cut on Mr. O'Keefe's nose, the right side of his nose, was inconsistent with coming from a vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Can you describe why you came to that conclusion?
Well, if you're standing at the back corner of the vehicle and it strikes the arm, and let's be clear, if nobody wants to say where the arm was or how it was positioned, if they're claiming the abrasions are a result of the fractured taillight, it has to strike the arm. You have to be standing like this. The debris goes forward with the vehicle. So it's with your arm like this, it already passes by the person. And if there would be any contact whatsoever, it would be with the right side of the face. The shard can't come out and then make a right turn and then somehow embed itself on the left side of the nose. That's entirely inconsistent with the fracture and how the glass and the cover would actually move.
Dr. Renshaw, you were asked a series of questions about a hat. Do you remember that?
I do.
About some shards of plastic material, correct?
Yes.
About a drinking glass,
Yes.
about a drinking straw.
Yes.
Doctor, if there was no collision, does any of that matter in terms of your biomechanical analysis and your reconstruction in this incident?
It does not.
Why?
Well, because if there wasn't a collision, it wasn't that debris or those items weren't a result of that impact. You can explain how that got there, I believe, easier than if you can't explain how the impact occurred, if the injuries don't match up, if you can't even prove what happened, then you can't use information or evidence if you have no idea how it got there to try and prove what you don't even know what happened. Scientifically, it makes no sense.
Scientifically, is the first question that has to be answered is, was there a collision? In your opinion, were any of the injuries that you saw suffered by John O'Keefe consistent with having been struck by the subject Lexus?
No, they are not.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I do.
Thank you, Doctor.
After the defendant rests, we will not be calling any witness putting on any further evidence.
Okay. All right.
Your Honor, it's late in the day. We would like to review required findings not guilty on disclosure of all evidence. It won't be a lengthy argument, but I'm happy to be heard on that in the morning if we got tomorrow morning.
Okay. Is that all we have left now? I have no idea what Mr. Alessi wants to talk about, but would
I'd like to respond to that, Your Honor, and the answer is, given Mr. Brennan's answer with no more witnesses, my issue is moved.
Thank you for watching. In my opinion, I conclude that Mr. Hankey decided not to call his rebuttal witnesses because his cross-exam of this key witness shattered his entire case. Like a bunch of taillight pieces flew across the room and landed in his nose. If you like this content, share with others that you think might also like this video.